Okay, so just as our Two-Door Cinema Club music kicked us off, let's get this started. I think we can jump in and get this webinar underway. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. Welcome to the second session of Highwire's Integrated Marketing webinar series. Our first session was back earlier this year. We talked about influence as a new currency in B2B, especially as buyers are forming opinions about brands and the options long before they talk to sales. But don't worry, if you missed the first one, you can still catch it on our website after this. And today's is, while we're part of a series, this topic today does stand on its own, so no need to have been on that one to join today. I'm really excited to dive into today's topics. We're going to ask ourselves questions about the marketing funnel. I think we've all heard of that before. Does it exist still? And if it doesn't exist, what replaces it? But before we get into it, I want to give a quick background on Highwire and then introduce the panelists today. For those who are not familiar with Highwire, we are a strategic marketing and communications firm, really focused on brands at the intersection of innovation and industry. So our clients turn to us to do everything from overall brand positioning to visual identities, creating creative platform developments, all the way through to CRM, lifecycle marketing, influencer marketing, social, earned and paid, as well as overall thought leadership and earned media. So everything starts with insights and audience research and overall analysis on what can influence the audience that our clients are trying to reach. And that's really going to drive the conversation that we have and the panelists that we have from our Highwire team today. So to start, we are going to start off with a fun social media trend called Pass the Phone. I'm going to start with the phone. My name is Bob Gone, which rhymes with phone. I'm an SVP of Integrated Marketing here at Highwire. I'll be moderating this discussion today. And I'm going to pass the phone over to our Queen of LA and someone who always keeps me updated on the latest influencer trends, Stephanie Martin.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Martin, and I lead talent and influencer at Highwire. My work focuses on the people, partnerships, and voices that help brands show up in the world. And while I spend a lot of my time thinking about engagement and influence, I'm going to pass it to Alex next. She's our true audience whisperer, helping us connect insights and data into something meaningful.
Thank you, Stephanie. Very excited to be here. My name is Alex Christian. I lead our Insights and Analytics team. I am lucky enough to partner with our clients to turn data into actionable insights and ultimately enable us to make better business decisions and turn all of us into more informed communicators. Most of my time during the day is spent helping brands understand what's working, what's changing, and where we can focus next. I'll pass the phone back to Adam, who is a master storyteller, an incredible builder of narratives, and an exceptional content strategist.
Thank you, Alex. It's nice to see everybody. I'm Adam Schwartzman, SVP and Head of Content at Highwire. My elevator pitch is that I help people find smarter ways to tell stories. Usually I break that down into brand strategy, content strategy, editorial standards, and best practices. And I'm also very involved in our AI practice and developing our tool Acro AI. And let me pass the phone back to Bob.
Awesome. Cool. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. All right, so let's dive in. I want to kick us off with just a quick poll question to everyone on the line here. And it's going to be just your overall initial reaction when you hear a marketing funnel. So I want everyone to take a few seconds when the poll comes up. What do you hear? What do you think of when you think of marketing funnel? What's your gut reaction? I don't want to, not a lot of thinking, just your initial reaction to this. That will kind of set up our conversation. Give everyone about 10, 15 seconds to pop in there. All right, let's wrap this up and we can share the results in right now, which I think is a great indicator of kind of why we want to bring everyone together today. You know, it's a useful model, it's outdated, but don't have a better one. We stopped using it years ago. I think this all aligns to our conversation. So let's dig into the first question, which, you know, is exactly this polarizing one. Is the marketing funnel dead? So Stephanie, why don't you kick us off?
So it definitely needs a makeover. The traditional funnel assumes a pretty straightforward path. Someone sees an ad, they click, it converts. And historically, that first purchase was treated as the finish line. But that's just not how people engage with brands today. Digital media has evolved into a much more interconnected ecosystem where commerce, social platforms, creators, and communities all overlap. And consumers just aren't moving through a neat linear journey anymore. They're constantly discovering, researching, and then re-engaging with brands across multiple touch points. So rather than thinking about how a funnel has a clear endpoint, think of it as a loop or an infinity symbol. It's a cycle of engagement that keeps reinforcing the relationship over time. Now, conversion is still an important metric, but we should be thinking about how a company and its brands creates an experience that gives people a reason to come back, advocate, and stay connected long after the initial transaction. Adam, I'm sure you have a point of view too.
I do, and I voted for number one. The funnel's not dead. Actually, I couldn't vote, but I would have if I had the option. With the caveat that I don't think it was ever a linear journey in the first place. So the way I use the funnel is as a sort of map or a field, maybe. When I think about an approach to content strategy, I like to break it down into simple questions. Who is the audience? What do they care about? And you can turn that into the questions that they might ask and then respond to those questions with content. So when you're doing that mapping in the first place, how do you start to think about accounting for the buyer who's just starting to look around at what's out there versus someone who's ready to make a purchase and just wants to know about the solutions and everybody in between? For me, the funnel is a really helpful way to map that out and then respond to those questions. But I'm not trying to take anybody from point A to point B. I'm more trying to meet them where they are with the questions that they have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing is it's a good educational tool as we're thinking about that content map across, the different phases: awareness, consideration, engagement, conversion, right? Because it'll be the North Star, but it shouldn't be the end all be all of how we map out our strategy overall. So I want to bring us to our next poll here about, like, when you think about the different versions of the funnel, um, where does your team lose the most ground today? As an awareness, consideration, post-sale engagement, or retention? Where are you finding that the funnel or your current markup isn't aligning to the plans you have?
So it's an interesting question. It's like, do you need that framework in the first place to arrange your content? And if so, well, actually, I guess I should wait for the poll results before I jump in, huh?
No, it's all good, Adam. So the poll here, like consideration and after awareness. I think awareness, obviously, it's a big part of what we all need to do. But this consideration to post sale and retention is constant. Like, how do we continue that? Which I think goes back to the loop and the overall like field analogy, which brings us to the question: if we establish the funnel as like a metaphor or at least a trap or not the end all be all, what's the operating model that replaces it? How do you turn that into something real beyond just marking content into different elements of those stages?
All right, now I can go.
There you go, Adam.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting question because you still have the same ambition, right? You still have the same audience that you're trying to contact in all of these different ways. And if that form is sort of going out the window, then what replaces it? Or sort of like, how do you um, what is the organizing principle around your content? So this is why I sort of in my first answer said that I still think the funnel has a role to play, because I don't believe it's a trap unless you follow it too religiously to the expense of all else. And if you follow it as like your sole source of truth, meaning like this is the only path I can follow, then I think you're ignoring the realities of the marketing journey today and just like the buyer's experience. But if you use it to guide your approach in the sense of knowing that some people are at point A, point B, point C, then you're retaining the flexibility that allows you to sort of meet the world without constraining yourself, but you're still basically using it for its utility and leaving on the floor or on the table the things that might constrain you.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting of what are you leaving behind when you follow a funnel journey and activate on a funnel journey. And I think that it made sense once upon a time because consumers had fewer choices, there was less noise, there were less stops along that journey. You could guide them so clearly between point A, point B, point C, etc. But today, choice is obviously infinite. All of our attention is fractured. We are all tired and have decision fatigue. And so when you think about it, awareness is no longer that starting point. And I found a really interesting stat as we were going back and forth and talking about this. 60% of consumers slash buyers consider multiple brands late in the purchase journey. So your buyer could be about to send that confirmation email or click yes on purchase, and all of a sudden they have multiple other brands that are feeding them content, or somebody else recommends something. We know how important peer-to-peer recommendation is. And then they pause, and then it extends the time to decision making, or they may have heard something that completely fractured everything that they had or that you had done up until then to get them to that point. So you talked about, and the poll was great because it had awareness and consideration and conversion and all of these different points that we've put sort of equal weight behind because they seemed so clear, and it seemed like we had to take people slowly through the funnel. But now, if that funnel doesn't exist and we think about the buyer journey in this ecosystem lens, it shows us the reality that consideration is actually extremely important, and consideration is part of every single touch point and every single marketing decision and every single sort of buyer step that they might be taking towards their decision is consideration around awareness, consideration around understanding, consideration around that conversion noise. So I actually believe that while the funnel doesn't exist anymore, consideration is a key element that we should be considering throughout all of the comms that we're doing on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of our clients, because that is a key component that can completely fracture the buyer journey.
It's such an interesting point. If you think about when I'm sort of walking someone through the funnel as like a 101, I talk about awareness as like, what is the issue? Consideration as like, what's out there to solve it? And decision as like, why should we use this specific solution? So when you look at that perspective, it's easy to see how consideration ladders up and down and tethers to both concerns. And so maybe you could say that that stage, which historically has sort of been in the middle and occupied a bit of a strange place, is maybe more vital than ever or deceptively important.
Yeah. And even I think a lot of us have decision regret or question even after we've made the conversion. And that's something that we see a lot with paid, but in other spaces too, is as soon as you get a new client or a new customer, that is when your competitors are going to start amping up their marketing efforts to get that person win that decision making. So they're starting to even question whether or not they made the right decision because they're hearing from all of these competitor brands that their solution was less expensive or their solution is a stronger component. So they're, again, that consideration that did I make the right choice and should I start exploring others already? That's starting even after you've converted people. So I just think consideration has this really interesting moment in time right now, and we've sort of ignored it. To your point, Adam, it's been this middle, like, okay, like let's get them aware, and then how quickly can we get them to conversion? And consideration is part of that buyer journey, and more important now than ever.
And I think
In
that's
some
key to
case,
like this like ecosystem analogy that we're using, right?
Exactly.
So talking about the funnel, and whether it's dead, outdated, whatever, like I think the big takeaway is that a funnel alludes to an endpoint, and a lot of that is driving to an SQL or an MQL for our marketing clients. But the reality is, yeah, you can make that sale, but like we still need to be able to influence that retention, that ongoing relationship with the customer, the overall experience. It's not just about like the brand and the sale. Of course, conversion is critically important, but then like how do you retain that customer and move forward? I think that's where the power of having coordinated efforts across every function within sales and marketing is really important, and that your success metrics tie back to those impacts, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I also like, I think we spent a lot of time focusing on what type of content to create for what parts of the funnel. And while that's important because you need to give different details to your customers relative to their journey, I think the risk in doing that, you sometimes miss the larger storytelling that you need to have from an always on campaign perspective. Obviously there's tent poles that you need to have throughout the year. They're going to be big moments of time, or they're tied to a user event or a theme or a seasonal event. But those things should also tie back to what you're always putting on, whether it's to your prospects or to customers to keep them engaged with the brand. And the channels that you activate too need to be part of that. And it's not just like your own channels. I think that's where things like influencer, like Stephanie, from your perspective, that can come into play, not just to acquire and drive awareness, but also reinforce that like brand affinity along the way.
In some cases, once you have that first initial conversion, sometimes that's where the relationship just begins. And there's such an important opportunity to keep your customers, your target audience connected, reinforce your brand proposition, and not lose out to the competitors like Alex was just talking about. And you can deploy so many vehicles to bring people back in. Sure, influencers, because that's where my head is usually at, are one of those things that help bring people back in. But then think about what then comes of it. You turn your consumers into advocates. They become your loyalty drivers. They then just become your community as you keep going.
So I think we talking about building this ecosystem, right? But it can't be like a set it and forget it type mentality, because you're always vying for attention. Awareness was our lowest on the poll, but we still need to make sure that people are aware of our brand and that we're top front and center as we're diving into the different parts of their decision tree. And I think like having this framework that we talk about with clients on a daily basis, like sprints, strips, and tests. So we have our sprints to get things in market, big around 10 polls. We have our drips that are always on, and then our tests. So about like 20% of the messaging is always on testing. How's this working? How's this resonating? How's this ladder back up to the pillar? And that help drive the rest of our campaigns. So using our sprints on the key messaging pillars and themes that we are mapped out throughout the rest of the year on a quarterly or monthly basis, and then making sure you have room for testing along the way that can ultimately engineer and help optimize those on a rolling basis, all staying true to the brand. And we'll talk a little bit about like the reasons to believe and how that's an important part of like your marketing ecosystem, but really understanding what to test and have the foundation to test things is viable to any of this marketing ecosystem theory that we're talking about. So I want to shift the conversation a bit toward like how do you know what to say, or how do you get a pulse on your audience so that you feel confident, not just in the philosophy and the ecosystem that you're creating, but the content that you're plugging into that ecosystem is actually going to resonate with the audience. So before we shift into that, what we want to talk about, I want to just ask the audience quickly, like in a poll, like how confident are you in understanding what your audience needs from you before you create content for you? Where do you rank yourself in that? I don't think there's any wrong answer. I think different pieces of content we have different levels of confidence, or different campaigns, but we have different levels of confidence. But we'll talk a little bit more how there's ways to increase that confidence. All right, give like about 5 more seconds and we'll close the poll. All right, let's close it out. So it looks like about, love the people who are very confident, 20%. Like that, there's definitely learnings in there to like build research somewhat, but it's mostly assumption. I think there's a lot what we see from clients, and a lot of the work we're doing is trying to push toward more of that very, very confident lens, because it really helps us to bring back to our clients, like, this is where we need to go. This is where your audience is going. So, say we have the framework of the ecosystem. Alex, I want to ping over to you. Like, what's the intelligence that should shape it? And how do you know that your ecosystem actually is working or can work? Or is there a way to do that before we even put content in the market? So curious, like where should it start?
Yeah, I really liked the responses to the poll because it felt like people were at least somewhat confident in understanding their audiences. And I think we should be. We have access to so much data, and if we don't have it now, the means to get data in the last 5 years has been so much easier than it used to be. And I think we can get very, very close to understanding exactly why our target audience says yes. And that is all we really need to then go back and work on a content framework or an influencer plan or just a broader comm strategy. If we know why people say yes, then we should develop content strategies that enable us to get to that yes as quickly and as easily and as confidently as we can. Like, why can't our audiences say yes quickly? Is like the question I want all of us to be thinking about all the time, because we can, but we have to do the research, or we have to make sense of the research that has already been done and answer that question of, I know exactly why my audience says yes. And that starts with audience data. And it starts with not treating every buyer the same way. We talked about this reimagining of the funnel into an ecosystem. And if we think about an ecosystem, that might look different to every audience and every buyer. And so if their ecosystems look different, then that why people say yes might also look different. But we have data to understand these people. We have understanding of the ecosystems that they prefer to live in and the ones that truly influence them. And so while I don't want to recommend clients to stop talking, there has to be a point where we start listening, and we can start listening in ways, like I said, much easier ways, much quicker ways, through audience modeling and through audience research, and really enable us to develop a back and forth with these audience targets where we understand their ecosystem better. We understand what actually moves the needle with them. We understand what is influencing them as well and how that might be changing quickly. I think a lot of people are starting to change their minds as to what they trust and the sources that they're going to. So if we have data and audience models that live in that real-time space, we can really actually listen in real time to these audiences and then act accordingly and shift the way that we're thinking about our ecosystem and shift the way that we're showing up in that ecosystem. So I think that there's a real interesting opportunity right now for us to get that real-time listening data to our audience so that we can close that yes gap.
Yeah, and I think using like the power of AI to bring all that data together in a way that we can actually ask those questions, right? And find,
Exactly.
you know, those reasons to believe from our audience, instead of just focusing as a marketer on like the speeds and feeds of a product that we're selling. Yes, those product details matter, maybe especially down into like a sales conversation. But we need to match like, why is that customer actually looking for an answer to a question, or answer a challenge that they have. One framework that I really like, and I'm sure a lot of people in this session will be familiar with her, but April Dunford has a framework. She is a longtime B2B brand positioning expert, and she asked this question: what would your audience use if your brand didn't exist? And I love that as a question to bring it into positioning opportunities, because it's not just a way to understand like what your competitor set is. I think we all have a good understanding of like who our clients' competitors are, or if we're working within a brand, who our competitors are up against, from a brand perspective. But that question can also get you to the root of like, all right, if those competitors didn't exist and this software or if this tool didn't exist, what would our audience use? And that gets down to the fundamental question of like, what is the problem they're trying to solve? I can use that to really orient your marketing strategy, build the right ecosystem. And then I think Alex, what you're saying, like the audience modeling allows us to ask those questions in a focus group environment to get real-time insights without having to go out to a large field analysis, and then we can get into that testing and learning and like content development very, very quickly. And Adam, I know like that, so asking the questions is a big part of like developing the content strategy.
Yeah, so 2 points. One is like how this is a foundational aspect to your content approach can't be overstated. If you're working on any sort of marketing push without awareness of what your audience cares about, what are their reasons to believe, what moves the needle for them, then you're not setting yourself up for success. I think all complicated, nuanced marketing questions can ultimately be broken down into quite simple foundational ones. And that's my approach, is building up from there. Now, the second point is just like, think about where we were 5 years ago, let's say, just to pick a sort of arbitrary time in the past, where to get this information, you could do a combination of interviewing people who might give you great information, but who knows if they're representative of their title, their industry, whatever. You could look for surveys that are published, out in the world, where it's probably giving you a great information, a statistically significant sample, but they may not be asking the exact questions you want. I don't think talking to a human is ever going away, and I think it's still important and enlightening. But what we can do with audience modeling is absolutely extraordinary. When I'm sort of starting a content campaign or strategy from the ground up, Alex is the first person I call to just like get to answer that question, because that's what I need. And when you can create an audience using AI, you can ask as many questions as you want. You can ask in great granularity or at a high level, and everything in between. So in my mind, this is like one of the most powerful and actually like thrilling things that AI has brought to our industry, is just the ability to do that and really get in the minds of your audience. Is it the same as a real person? No. Is it pretty incredibly close and still enlightening? Absolutely yes. And the one other thing I'd put on the table is now that we're on to AI, maybe that's my doing. If you think about, there are pitfalls with bringing AI into your approach, probably in any business, but in my mind, I'm thinking about marketing communications. So if you have AI taking over, say, more of your content development, you have a greater risk of homogenizing your content, making it more of a commodity. How do you change that? How do you avoid that? Many ways, but probably the most foundational is making sure that the content you're creating, even if a meaningful amount of the work is coming from an AI, is that it's being informed by those audience preferences. And that's how you, in the most important, and not the only, but maybe the most vital ways, you differentiate it.
Yeah, and Adam, I think you hit on like a really important thing. Yeah, you can use AI to build content, and like that human layer is always a part of it, and from our perspective. But if you're generating content based off of these audience data points, you need to make sure that audience data points aren't just a commoditized part of the LLM cycle too, right? So like,
Totally.
how do we guard against that? To make sure if we're using these audience modeling, it's based in reality versus just plugging some questions into a GPT and saying like, hey, I am a IT decision maker, and I'm looking for this, right? That's not necessarily what we're talking about here.
I think that's exactly right. And it's like, steal your moderation for a second and ask Alex, like, Alex, how do we set that apart? How do we use more than just what's baked into the LLM, or maybe what's easily accessible on the internet?
Yeah, and we have some incredible tools that enable us to do that in a really smart way. I said at the beginning, we need to just start listening, and that's exactly what these tools enable us to do. We have an incredible process, because I think we kind of started to experiment with speaking to audiences in ways that anybody could, and then we quickly saw the pitfalls that you talked about, Bob and Adam, and we had to rethink it. And part of what our rethinking of the way that we develop these audience models is to actually pull people from Twitter, from X, from LinkedIn, from past surveys that we've done, and collect as much real data and recent data too into our space. And when we work within the tool that we've developed, it's called Acro Audience. And when we work within that tool, we have to tell it all the time, only reference this data. Stop going out, reference this data, reference this data, reference this data. Because to your point, you can see when these LLMs start to influence the way that these audiences are responding. And it can quickly throw off the work that we've done, and the work that we're doing, and the work that we want to put in front of a client. And that's also, that's the expertise of everybody's everybody on this call is we can quickly discern between what just general responses versus what our audience response is. And then we can quickly pivot when that starts to get a little bit muddied. So it really starts with the data and the input into these platforms, though, rather than just going out broadly and trying to build out an akin audience that doesn't actually reflect the people that we're trying to speak with.
And then Steph, from an influencer perspective, like how can we use influencers as part of like understanding the audience or building the right model around audiences to influence?
This is insanely timely because Alex and I have been working on this for quite some time because you can't take anything for granted. And in the influencer space, the end user, which is human beings who are interested in content and who are invested in the influencers because they've created these relationships online, will sniff out something that feels copy paste or not meant for them. So pressure testing what the audience is interested in, what is going to move them, and never just taking anything truly at face value to understand that audience and then making sure it translates through that human lens. We can't do one without the other. It's the smarts of AI and audience modeling in conjunction with what our influencer partners are seeing from their communities too, that help us build really meaningful content that is going to translate. Because you can develop something that's completely based on data alone, and then miss the opportunity to put it through the lens of that influencer's community needs, and what they expect to see from that endpoint, because it'll fall flat without having some of that nuance. So it's the 1 + 1 = the 3, which is where the magic comes from.
Awesome. So ultimately, I think, we're talking about building audience intelligence as an infrastructure for that always on approach to testing messages, testing creative, getting it into market and making sure it has a chance to resonate before we know it's actually in market and resonating. Then also using the power of the influencers or other stakeholders within your ecosystem to understand your audience beyond just like the audience data points that you already have. Bringing all that together is ultimately what fuels your marketing ecosystem and the content and the influence you need to create. I want to shift into the big question that we'll put up our fourth poll on is what's the hardest part of proving marketing's impact right now? We're doing all this great stuff. Our content's out there. We know it's going to work with the audience. How do we prove that and bring it back to the business? So curious, like where are those pain points right now for everyone in the answer? We have getting credit for influence that isn't last touch is an issue. Convincing leadership legacy metrics aren't enough. Lack of good tools data to measure the full ecosystem. Internal silos between marketing, sales, and comms. The 4 options we have here. I'm sure there's more, but we want to just bucket it in these 4 for now.
We need an all of the above one.
I know, right? Yeah. All right, we'll put the polls up, and we have almost like a 60-40 split. One, getting credit for influence that isn't last touch. So yeah, like how do we not just only be responsible for last touch? And then the internal silos between marketing, sales, and comms. I think that's something that on the agency side, we feel every day across clients. And we can talk a lot about like how we need to bring those things together. But let's talk about a little bit about measurement and proving that impact in the ecosystem era. Like we know we need to build an ecosystem. We have a sense of what it should look like because we've developed audience data and we've tested it in market. But how do we prove that value? And I think this, our poll shows this is where a lot of our B2B marketing clients and B2B marketers in general get stuck. That ecosystem model makes intuitive sense. We got to bring everyone together. We all need to be on the same page. But then someone asks for a dashboard. And we're back to looking at sessions, looking at clicks, looking at SQLs or MQLs. And like, that's it. So like, how do we evolve how we measure? And are those traditional metrics still important or not? So Alex, when you're talking to clients about, yes, we're using insights, but then we need to build analytics behind it. I'll just share. Oh, I didn't share the results real quick. This is where we ended up on the poll. I think everyone's split between last touch influence and then the silos between marketing. How do we start that conversation with clients, and how do we kind of start bringing that forward?
Yeah. Well, to go back to the funnel, we have historically treated it as this North Star, and we started that by analyzing where we were along that funnel and identifying those gaps, and then building plans to close some of those gaps. And then we would measure how we were doing in closing those gaps and improving that funnel journey. So if we are saying, which we are, the funnel isn't a true reflection of the journey anymore, and it is rather this ecosystem, then building a measurement framework around improving funnel gaps just doesn't make sense anymore. So we have to evolve how we measure. And I think understanding that lack of linear journey is part number one, and shifting again into that measuring an ecosystem. So in my opinion, there are really three sort of considerations for measurement of this ecosystem. I think the first step is we have to enhance the data. So oftentimes that could be interpreted as getting more data. And I don't necessarily think that's true unless you have absolutely no starting place. I think that we often have a lot more data than we even know what to do with, and it just lives in spreadsheets and reports, and it doesn't speak to other data. It doesn't reflect this broader way of thinking. And so that's why I say the first step is not to get more data, it's rather to enhance the data that we have and map it to the ecosystem that we're building towards. And there's some really interesting ways that we have enhanced data on our side. And I think that the industry is going to continue that enhance, not engulf mentality. And we're going to see some really interesting ways to enhance it. Number two, and I think that this is part of that enhancement, is improving the tools. Improving our measurement tools, improving our data tools. I'll use this silly analogy, but a carpenter is not going to get very far with a broken measuring tape. And you can think about that in this space too. If we have a broken measuring tape, our data is not talking to each other, our tools aren't working together, we're not going to get very far. Our room isn't going to get built. And if it does, it's going to take way too long, and we're going to be very frustrated along the journey. So enhancing the data, improving the tools that we're using. With AI, it is incredible what we have done in terms of enhancing the data just in the past year. I think we're going to continue to get smarter. I think we're going to continue to get best practices put down on paper and get them more widespread. So that's part of this. And then number three is measuring in value, not metrics. And whatever that value is to you and to your clients is what we're going to want to measure. So for example, value is time. And we can think about what's that time to yes that I talked about earlier. Value is perception. And perception equals conversion and sales and retention and peer-to-peer recommendations and maybe even consideration, since I'm bringing it back to how important that is. And value is growth. It's customer growth, it's business growth, it's reputation growth, it's industry growth. So thinking about measurement in terms of value, not metrics, is going to be essential as we think about what the ecosystem measurement looks like.
In our world, in all things influencer, measurement for us starts at that brief stage. We will use the audience data that Alex and team will give to us, and sometimes it comes from our respective clients, but we know that not all influencers are created equally and can drive the results that are required. So, of course, we're going to want to make sure that we're finding you the right credible experts that are vetted for the expertise that are needed to drive the content that is standard, but making sure that they're either operating on the right channels that are supporting the things that you need to get done. We know that in some cases, LinkedIn is going to drive further down the quote unquote funnel in terms of conversion, different than something like Instagram that will help create more volume or awareness. And so, if you need to be able to show a certain ROI for this campaign to be successful, we're not going to just look at the expertise and the credibility of the influencers. We still will, but it's in conjunction with the realities of the channel and how in which their communities engage. And also in today's landscape, we have to benchmark past performance, platform algorithms, and those formats to evaluate success. So we talked about how not every partner is going to be great at doing the same job. But if you can imagine, there's sometimes we have multiple objectives like building awareness, education, and then moving buyers closer to a decision. So that means that we would have to deploy a mix of partners, each playing to their strengths. So a blended roster would typically be something that we would deploy for these multiple goals. And I will go back. We talked about traditional metrics. Are they vanity or do they still stay? Listen, views and engagement still matter. But when we put them in context of what we're actually trying to achieve, that's when we can actually tell if we're driving that impact.
So we're going to shift to Q&A in just a minute. So I just want to tell the audience, if you have questions, feel free. We've already gotten a few, but feel free to put them into chat, and we'll bring as many as we can into the Q&A. But just on this measurement point, I think a big thing is like the value of marketing. Measuring it has come like commoditized of like sessions, clicks, like those numbers, but the impact is really a lot larger. So that needs to be part of the conversation from the jump when you're building your plans and like convincing leadership. Whether that's overall brand reputation and perception, or it can be, do we look at the quality and nature of customer service inquiries? Are people understanding the product? So you're having less people asking like, how do I use this? Because that might be part of like core function of product marketing, or even like product usage and adoption of a new feature. Can you tie that back directly to a campaign message that you put in? Because hey, we're emphasizing this to see how people are using it, and we've seen an uptake in it. So like bringing in product usage into how you're viewing marketing metrics, and then like if you're talking about overall brand perception, look at like, can you partner with HR and look at inbound talent inquiries about people? Hey, I want to work here because of the things that you are doing in market. Those should all be considered as part of the marketing ecosystem ways of measurement beyond just like traffic and clicks and feeds, especially as people are discovering your brand in AI conversations more so. And those vanity metrics might be different than they were a year or 2 or 3 years ago.
Bob, that's what I wanted to call out. The sort of elephant in the room is just how much of like search and just discovery is taking place either on an AI platform directly or with AI, as in like no-click search. I don't know if it was ever super clean to treat something like web traffic as like a synecdoche for audience engagement. Nowadays, it's much, much less, just given how much search is happening in so many different places.
Okay, so let's shift to Q&A. So if you haven't yet already, try to put something in the chat and we'll field it. But one of the first questions we got is a question around comms and PR partnering more closely with content teams in this new world. I think that's something we see every day with our clients. How do those two functions actually work together day to day, and where do you see that partnership breaking down most often? I'll just quickly from my point of view and where it breaks down most often, I think goes back to the notion of like tent poles and always on approaches. When it comes to PR and earned media, we are all about like, what's the pitch today and why is this better than news cycle today? And the storytelling is so focused on that. Sometimes you lose the overall narrative of the brand from like an earned media perspective that you need to be telling on a consistent rolling basis for marketing and influencing customers that way. So it's very easy for the marketing team to be like, oh, PR is doing this versus what we need to do. But you need to have those conversations and communications open, because ultimately those real-time pitch angles that PR might be going out to drive thought leadership real time to a news cycle needs to ladder up to something bigger than it is. And then also those ideas that PR can come up with on the spot are angles that ultimately should inform marketing content down the road. So it's very easy to get lost in just like 3 feet in front of us, but like the bigger macro, they need to communicate what's being pitched together and what pieces of content are being developed, because it ultimately fuels each other.
I think that's exactly
thoughts,
right,
Tim?
Bob. I would just add not only open, but open and early. When you're developing a content strategy, and you know that PR can be a piece of the puzzle, it's like very savvy and smart to think about what are we creating and is it mediagenic and in what ways. Otherwise, you're fitting it at a later stage when maybe it's already been baked out or developed. If you can start from a point of what we're creating, we want to do more with it, and that goes beyond PR. It could go into influencer and into paid campaigns and sort of everything under the sun. You can make those things all sing in harmony, but to do so requires you to be deliberate and to do so from the jump.
Yeah, I'll before we move on to the next question, I'll just say we have a client that we work with their social team directly. And we share bi-weekly reports of what's going on in the industry, what's going on for the brand, what's going on in larger topic conversations, what's going on with the audience. It's really just it's an incredible strategic point of view, but it's also just an information dump of here's everything that's going on. And it is through the lens of social, since that's our client. But of course, it talks to content, it talks to PR, and our client has meetings with her content team and with her PR team. And what she had shared with us is the report that we shared over to her, she was able to use in her meeting with her content team and use it as strategy and use it as really a gift that she was giving to them, of saying, look at this incredible insight that we found through our listening practices on social media. How can we bring this to life through content? How can we start to talk to media about this problem that we've identified before it blows up and becomes something bigger? And so there's a real opportunity for us as an agency to give these types of gifts to our clients so that they can start to build the bridges on their side as well. Because it's not just the agency that's might feel like these teams are working in silos, it's also our clients. So how do we enable them to have those conversations in a really smart and strategic way?
I think that relates to this next question we have here. Someone asked specifically about like doing more with less. As budgets and headcounts stay tight, where do we see teams making the highest impact trade-offs right now, and what's safe to cut versus what people are cutting that they shouldn't be cutting? So I think that integrated mindset might come into play here on this.
Yeah,
On this
some of
answer.
it, I think, is unfortunately stuck within organizational structures and how in which a company is organized. And please don't take offense to it if this is how your company is organized, but you might have divisions of labor where public affairs sits in one lane, brand and marketing sits in another, socials in another lane, and each one of you probably have your respective priorities, mission criticals. You might even have like your own budgets that you're responsible for. And that makes perfect sense because you will want to do well for the job that you are given. But if you really were to have the freedom to break down silos, together, all employees at a company should be moving together as a whole to further a company's mission, vision, values, business, end goal. And sometimes you just have subject matter expertise or channel expertise that helps you drive that in a meaningful way. So, where you can have those moments of interconnectedness, like Alex was saying, how she brings these gifts of knowledge to multiple team leads, there's an opportunity then to figure out how to work together. So then you don't have to choose. You have a little bit more of an integrated mindset across all of these divisions to figure out, let's all work together to accomplish X goal. And this is how it'll live from a story that we might need to push to reporters. This is how it'll live in social. So it feels unified. And it feels a little bit more impactful. And that could be a little bit of retooling of skill set and talent within the house that you all operate within. But you do have to make trade-offs. Sometimes certain channels are going to work harder for you than others, and that has to be okay. But if there's opportunities to bring people in a little bit to those other lanes so they have an appreciation of what good looks like, they might be able to represent you and or you might be able to collaborate a little bit differently and work together towards that end goal.
I want to take up just like the back half of that question, which is like where are people maybe looking to cut where they ought not be? And something I've seen and I always caution against is when we present, say, a plan for content strategy that says we're going to start by defining these building blocks. So we're going to go and research your audience and your competitive landscape and identify the white space. Then we're going to turn that into a proposal for content. Then we're going to create that content. Then we're going to push it out in these different channels. And they'll say it all sounds great, but we don't want to pay for the first part. So just skip the audience analysis, skip the competitor stuff. And I try to say, here's why you shouldn't do that. And here's why that's so important. And I think we've sort of answered this earlier in the conversation, but the fact that those are your navigation aids and that's what you move towards in your approach is so vital. And I say, look, what does this look like without that information? We know sort of how we think about ourselves, how we talk about ourselves, but we don't know how close that is to what our audience expects, what their preconceptions are, and what they're looking to see. And so without that initial insight, we're starting off, I guess, like on one foot because we just don't have what we need to really tell the story that needs to be told.
I know we're running about 5 minutes left in the chat, but I want to get one more question in before we wrap things. Someone wants to know, like, what's the most impactful channels and content types right now as we're thinking about B2B? If we had to point to one or two channels that are overperforming expectations today, what would they be and why? Which I think it goes back to like some of the measurement questions too we've been talking about. I know one thing, at least from my conversations with clients, I mean, this is not anything new that we've heard, but like AEO, GEO is continues to be something we're thinking about content. But things like YouTube and socials influence on AEO, GEO continues to be a regular theme, especially over the last quarter in conversations that I've had. So I think more and more brands are recognizing how, you know, the Googles of the world have kind of re-engineered their thing, their platforms to allow video and social into the room a bit more to drive the discoverability. So I think that's the one. Think about channels and content types: video, YouTube, and what sits behind, like the important content nuances that sit behind that are things that I'm seeing in my conversations. But like Steph, Alex, Adam, obviously, curious to your input.
I'll start. I think and this has been a channel that I've recently spent a lot of time on because it's so enlightening, but Reddit. I'll leave it up to Steph and Adam to say, okay, so what about Reddit? But just in terms of the trust that I think Reddit communities have, especially around how important we know that consideration phase has really become, it can really help make or break a decision about a brand by listening to that peer-and-peer conversation, getting reviews that you know haven't been bought, and that you can really trust. And these are actual users, not just brands speaking about themselves. So I think Reddit is a really important channel. I don't know if Steph and Adam have ideas on, okay, so what do we do about it?
Reddit is a gold mine for sure when you want to look at behavior, conversation. It is should be tread a little lightly when you think about how then do you engage. Like you were saying, the audience is very discerning and doesn't want to be sold a bag of lies because they will come for you. But again, a space that's really important nonetheless, but I will double click on the YouTube, as Bob has said. It is such an amazing space for search. It's also an amplifier for other places that people are creating content on, like LinkedIn or TikTok. So long form and short form perform well there. So don't miss the opportunity to engage there as well.
And I think the risk in just saying those two things though is like just because video is a good format doesn't mean we have to ignore, we can't create other pieces of content, in-depth pieces of content. In
Absolutely.
fact, like we're working with I think I'm stealing your case study, Steph, but like worked with a client where we built a nice, robust like research white paper, right? And then use that as throughout the ecosystem across all the own channels, but then engage influencers who develop video content to talk about this. Like we need to give these content formats reasons to exist, right? With like rich, deep pieces of content beyond just like the widespread like visibility content. I think that's a core thing to make sure it's not missed in that ecosystem.
Just on that point too, is that we've curated our consumption in the world. So being able to show up in many places is also important, because you might miss somebody on YouTube, but you might catch them on LinkedIn, or they might be a subscriber to a Substack. So thinking about multiple channels, the formats that are going to work well there, it's just the reality of consumption right now. Back in the day, you used to be able to have your newspaper delivered to you at home, and if you got the article placed there, you were golden. It's just a different reality that we have to mind right now.
Awesome. Well, that's going to bring us to the top of the hour. I really appreciate everyone who stayed on for the full hour and listened to our conversation today. Would love to hear more conversations around this. But just a quick recap on where we netted out. Like the funnel isn't just outdated; it's actively kind of misleading right now. If we just think about it in the funnel, focuses attention on those trackable parts of the journey and ignores where influence is actually being formed and where influence needs to continue after a conversion point. The ecosystem model is built for the buyer journey as it actually works, as a loop or a field, and not just a funnel with an ultimate endpoint. And then winning means tying everything together, whether it's content, creative, influencer, insights, measurement together beyond just those vanity metrics, aligned to a set of business outcomes and not just those salad metrics. So thanks for everyone for joining. I think we have one last poll. So we can understand what type of the conversation was great. What do you want to hear from next, and what can we do in any follow-up? So if you are able to take a few seconds before you log off to hit the poll, great. But if you're looking for partners who can help, consider Highwire. And I hope you all enjoyed the conversation today and have a great rest of your week. Really appreciate the time.